Welcome to today's event, the latest in Transportation Insights Digital Master Series. Today we're here for the supply chain forecast for 2021, and we'll look ahead at the transportation trends we're going to see to start this new year. I'm Michael Willard in the marketing division at Transportation Insight. We've invited our transportation and supply chain experts to join us today. Before we turn it over to our panel, I want to remind our audience that we welcome your participation. Please submit your questions for our panelists in the GoToWebinar Questions panel. We'll try to address some of your questions during the event, and we'll take as many as possible at the conclusion of our presentation. The presentation is going to be moderated today by Sophie Dabbs. Sophie is Transportation Insights Senior Vice President of Client Services. She has 2 decades of diverse supply chain experience working with retailers, manufacturers, and distributors to control their transportation cost and transportation strategy. Sophie leads the client services team responsible for delivery of seamless solution implementation and exceptional customer service. Sophie also enjoys business conversations about transportation and supply chain strategy. Let's begin that conversation today with an introduction of our panel of experts. Sophie?
Thanks, Michael. Hey, thank you to our audience today. Happy New Year. We've got a group of experts here today who you are going to recognize all of them, all of their faces. We have just been very excited to kick off 2021, perhaps leave 2020 behind. We're going to ask that our experts today give us a little insight into what we see coming down the pipe for you. We're going to start today with Mr. Todd Benge, Vice President of Parcel Operations. Well known, Mr. Chris Mendenhall, Vice President of LTL Pricing Services. James Matthews, Director of Truckload Procurement. The illustrious Rick Rummett, Vice President of Client Services, International Warehousing and Supply Chain Expert. And then last but not least, Mr. John Richardson, Vice President of Supply Chain Consulting. Today, though, we're going to start with small parcel and Todd Benge. Todd, this has been a hot topic, not that everything else isn't, but it is certainly on everyone's lips. Can you get us started today?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much, Sophie. So it is 2020 was an extremely unique year, very chaotic in the world of transportation, especially in the parcel world. 2021 is starting out with a little bit of the same. So what we're seeing moving forward, we're seeing that the carriers have announced that they're going to go ahead and continue on with the COVID-19 surcharges and fees, both UPS and FedEx. And now here's the key to remember. They haven't given an end date to those surcharges and fees. And just real quick to go back in time, when the fuel surcharge for parcel first was implemented, it was sold as a temporary surcharge and fee. And the carriers were only going to use the surcharge and fee until the economic impacts were finished, and then they would pull back on the surcharges and fees. Well, as we all know, that didn't happen. And basically what that became now, basically a constant charge within the world of small package. And I'm not saying that the surcharge or fee will continue, but what I do see is that they're just going to create a different pricing mechanism, and they're going to have those type of fees and be more religious at applying these surcharges and fees. We heard that this year they got the 105-inch rule. So with length, width, and girth of 105 inches, there's a new surcharge on the additional handling. They've had additional handling for a long time, but now they've added another definition, therefore more packages will fall into that category. Yes, it's also making a difference. Starting in April, we're going to assess this charge on additional handling basically in a slotted rule. If you think about it, it's a little bit like the fishing rules that some fish have when you're catching them. You can't have a fish that's less than this size, and you can't have one that's over this size. You got to catch it right in the ear. Well, what they're doing now is they're doing the additional handling by the zone. So if you're going to use their feed network and you are going to surpass a certain distance, so zones are based on distance. So zone 2 is the cheapest UPS in the world of additional handling and large package surcharge. Then you have zone 3 and 4, which is medium, right? That has an additional charge, right? It's another $2. And then you go out to anything above zone 5. So those are the longer distance hauls. FedEx hasn't followed, but never say never. So give them another year, probably have some kind of change moving in the future. What we do see, or we do project, though, is that COVID is going to last for a while until the United States starts to open up and we get more comfortable in a public setting and the vaccinations are more readily available. So this capacity crunch that we're feeling and experience right now, we're going to see through until the beginning of the summer. And then sometime in the summer, we should start to see some more relief in that area. However, what we do project is the carriers are going to be, when I say the carriers, I'm talking the FedEx and the UPS, are going to be much more targeted on the customers that they are going to have in their network and support their network, and be more vigilant in trying to control price. And what we do anticipate is that we will probably see somewhere along the lines of several different new entries into the world of small package on the courier/regional basis. So the regional carriers are expanding and having issues with capacity on their own front, but this is helping them get the capital needed to help invest and move forward. So that's a good thing. And so we see that down the road, competition could reappear and make the front of, for the consumer, a better entity going into 2022. But 2021 is still going to be very tight and very cost conscious. So it's a situation where you need to really look at your operation and your network to make sure that your efficiencies are as streamlined as possible, so that when you're making the selection and you're making the right carrier choice, you're doing it so that at the end of the day, your overall company benefits, and make sure that you make the right selection. And time and transit is going to be critical to say, take a look at making sure that you don't use a different mode at a substantial increase in cost, such as air, next day air, second day air, but get and streamline your order cycle so that you utilize the preferred programs or the ground programs more efficiently, so that you can try to maintain and reduce your cost overall to your network. Sophie, that's basically it in a nutshell, what I anticipate and see happening through the year of 2021.
Thanks, Todd. And for the audience, if you think of any questions as the other team members are giving their updates, please don't hesitate to put that in the chat box for Michael to bring back to us at the end of our program here. So with that, let's move on to Mr. Chris Mendenhall. Chris, what's going on in LTL these days?
Thanks, Sophie. So some of the problems that we had in the second half of 2020 have carried over into the first of 2021. You know, the volumes continue to grow, e-commerce feeding that, just a strong economy feeding that. So those things have kind of carried over into 2020. We measure on-time percentage, and we kind of look at it two ways. We see what the carriers are reporting to us, the LTL carriers. Of course, that generally will show, you know, in the 90s to the high 90s. But then when we measure it, what's actually happening on shipments that are booked through TMS, you know, last year we saw some carriers drop into the high 70s, low 70s, but even the best of the carriers were in the 80s with many of our clients. And so kind of depending on the industry, on-time percentage has been really, really tough. And that's kind of carried forward into Q1. It has gotten a little bit better after the Christmas rush, so a little bit of relief inside. Carriers tell us that in 2021 that the intent is to not really expand the footprint, to do more infill. A bunch of the carriers have told us that they've got new doors coming on. The capital expenditures have been increased for this year for equipment. You know, a lot of the problem has just been having enough equipment. We've got customers that can't get enough drop trailers for daily swaps out there. And so additional equipment coming online is a big push for 2021, but not a lot of expansion outside of their normal territories. some of the issues that we see out there just on getting delivery is, we see when freight is getting to either the client's distribution center or into the destination terminal, just being able to work those things. Those things are sitting out on the yard and backing up, and just long delays on getting those deliveries. One of the positive sides is the major carriers have told us that they've got a big enough book of business now on blanket rates that they're able to turn that lever on and off, and there's less impact right now, or we're seeing less impact for sure, on our client-specific pricing than what we see on blanket rates, because when you got a big enough book of business on blanket rates, you can turn that on and turn it off and get immediate results, as opposed to that client-specific pricing, which is you're not really able to address until you get to the renewal date. So that is a little bit of a bright side out there. The carriers are increasingly being more selective on that hard to stow type freight, or the trailer that are the type of freight that is just difficult to get on and off of the trailer. Overlength is going to push in. It really started in 2019. We saw a push for it in 2020, and we're seeing carriers come back and ask for increased charges on the overlength charge out there. So that'll continue into this year. The California pocket is by far in this country is by far the worst issue that we have. The COVID impact out there, the regulations inside of the state, just the normal issues that we have in California. And we're seeing some increases out there. That is where most of that new equipment is going, is what we're being told. But we still have major problems on California. We've got carriers that pass on bids especially in Southern California, where they're just trying to limit what they've got so that they don't impact all of their customers. And that is on that blanket rate where we see the most adjustments being made, or moving freight on and off of the blanket in California as a whole. Electronic bill of lading is a push for this year. We got some carriers that are really close to that in the LTL side, very similar to what the parcel carriers are doing. That'll be paperless, so it aids in that no touch side. It also makes the handling of that, or the time spent on that dock, faster for both shipping and for receiving. And it also allows the carriers in the LTL side to start building those line haul units, and just their outbound runs every night earlier in the day. So that they're not having to wait until that bill of lading gets back to the dock to actually determine what they've got going out, where they're going to send those outbound line haul units. The last one that the last call that we had, we discussed the one thing that our clients could do and to best serve themselves for in the LTL side, and that really is just working with both our group and with your account managers when we have those service issues with individual carriers, as opposed to just jumping or blocking them. Allowing us to work with the carriers to put action plans together to see if we can't make those problems go away with the operations side, with the LTL carrier, wherever that may be. Everybody's got those issues. The best of the carriers have them, and then the carriers who, maybe tier 2 or tier 3 in service, across the board, that's happening out there. So we've been successful working with those individual issues, and are happy to do so. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Sophie.
Thanks, Chris. Let's move on to Truckload. James, what's it look like out there?
Oh, well, thanks, Sophie. Thanks for everybody that joined. I'll start off with kind of what it's looking like the first couple weeks into January. We've actually seen the normal seasonal dip in demand over the last couple of weeks. But ironically, what you didn't see is a dip in prices. Dip in demand, the rates actually plateaued or kind of stayed strong, which I think is pointing to rates staying strong for the next few months as well. We've got several things that are going to impact the first half of this year rates. A lot of new equipment sales, a lot of expenditures, a lot of trying to seat drivers in those trucks are going to keep upward pressure on those rates for the first half of 2021. But in that, I would expect to see year-over-year rates. They're elevated over what they were in 2020 this time of year. When we went into 2020 and we started kind of hitting that the COVID slowdown, rates were extremely depressed. Then when the full impact and the capacity crunch kind of hit, rates elevated pretty high, and that's kind of where they're holding now. So from this time last year, your rates are going to be well above where they were. When you look at it across the entire year of 2021, I would expect to see your spot rates increased about 5 to 7% over the year, and your contract rates increase about 3 to 5% over that time frame. Now, going into this year and starting probably around May, June, we really saw a lot of tender rejections at contractual rates and a lot of that freight moving over into the spot world. I think we're starting to see more carriers willing to put in contractual rates and commit that capacity at those contracted rates than they have been in the previous months. So I anticipate getting more shippers to lock in on these contractual rates, even if they're shorter term contract terms. Maybe quarterly pricing, maybe 6-month pricing, and then renegotiate as we go into maybe a lower demand or higher capacity market. With that, you're also going to see an uptick in tender acceptance. As I mentioned, they dropped from it being about 90 to 95% tender acceptance in January, February, March of last year to as low as 40, 45% acceptance in May and June. We're already seeing a dramatic upward trend in tender acceptance, and I expect that to continue in conjunction with new contractual rates. I think you'll see more freight kind of auto tendering to that primary, secondary, and tertiary carrier. With that, we're actually doing a lot of negotiations. So you heard from Chris about the instability in the California market. You heard some of it from Todd. I know you'll hear some of it from Rick. We're actually experiencing the ability to maybe have longer term negotiations off the West Coast. And that to me is actually exciting. I think that's kind of pointing towards some stabilization off of the West Coast. If we have less coming in during the Chinese New Year, maybe we're able to pare down some of the inventory that we've got in stock there, and that could only increase it. So we've actually, on intermodal and truck, we've negotiated double the capacity allocations for some of our clients without taking a rate increase. We were presented with a rate increase for that same business, and just through conversations, they kind of took a longer term approach, did not take the rate increase, and doubled the allocations. All of those things actually kind of point towards a positive for over the road and intermodal off of the West Coast. Now, if chaos kind of continues in the LTL small parcel world, that could lengthen the runway to stability, but I do see it on the horizon. In the second half of the year, I think capacity is going to improve for several reasons. I think you're going to have stabilization in markets, but then you're also going to have new capacity kind of hitting the road. Over the last couple of years, new truck sales has been non-existent. If you look over the last several months, it has been very active, and I think we're at about 200% increase in new truck orders. Now, a lot of that might be replacement equipment, but I think a lot of that is also going to be expansion capacity. Now, what does that do with the rates? In the first half of the year, I think it's going to actually add rate pressure because you're competing for a driver to sit in that new equipment. We saw a lot of drivers leave the market in 2020, some through the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, about 27,000 that didn't even start the process of getting reinstated. And then you also saw some people just leave the market because of the instability and retiring. We've got an aging driver pool. So we're gonna have to do something to bring drivers back in and sit in that new equipment. But once they've done that, once organizations have been able to get their equipment, it's on the road, they've got a driver seated, That's going to add a lot of capacity out there, and then you're going to start seeing some competition to grab some market share from clients, and that's going to create a downward rate pressure starting in the summer, probably around July 5th is when you can normally set your calendar when you're going to see some rate relief in the truckload market. I think this year will be a little bit more seasonal than it was last year, and that's when you can expect to see that. And I think that's going to coincide with some of the easing in the other modes as well. That's what I've got for today. Thanks, Soph.
Thanks, James. Certainly, with our domestic modes, certainly nothing boring going into 2021. Rick, what's it look like on the international front?
A lot of the same as James and Chris and Todd have talked about, Sophie. And on the international side, there's been no appreciable decline in volume from peak season. It's December. I'll go back to December. Volumes were up 30% over December 2019. E-commerce, PPE, furniture, a lot of different e-commerce channels. Business was at record pace. December 19 was actually the third busiest month on container volume, next to October and August. I've been doing this a long time. December has never been a record anything in container volume. So it was an impact that has spilled over to 2021, and we're still feeling it in the markets. Keep in mind, December's typically a kind of a slow month. It allows the industry to take a breath and to catch up a bit, to prepare for the capacity that comes pre-Chinese New Year. We didn't get that breath. There was nothing typical about 2020, so I don't know why we would have thought December would have been typical of Decembers in the past. It's and we're feeling the pain, which rolls us into 2021. The infrastructure that supports the international business, particularly ocean, is at capacity. COVID certainly is not helping. 35% of the container volume comes into the U.S. through the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles, and they're in California. Chris mentioned California, Todd mentioned California. They have very strict requirements there. At every shift change into the port with the port workers, there's mandatory testing that takes time out of their normally productive workday. If an employee tests positive, not only do you send them home, you send close contact associates of theirs, you send them home. So what you end up is a very low productivity level in the port of Long Beach. And it's real, folks. I mean, it's real. Unfortunately, we had 2 port workers in Long Beach pass away last week. That's a tragedy, and it gives some point to the seriousness of this epidemic, and it's affecting people in the logistics infrastructure. Chris mentioned the number of call-offs in the LTL industry in California is really affecting service levels there. Well, when you're at the tip of the spear of what comes into the U.S., you can imagine what type of infrastructure challenges there are. The result is this morning there's 40 vessels sitting in the port of Long Beach waiting for berths. When you do the math, from 7,500, 8,000 cans to 10,000 cans are sitting there ready to come into this already stressed infrastructure. It'll give you some idea of what we've got in front of us. I see this volume being absorbed slowly up to Chinese New Year. We were all thinking, well, Chinese New Year will give us the break we need. There's too much there. There's too much there. It won't absorb through Chinese New Year. So now you're seeing projections of this volume glut going all the way through the first quarter. And I've even heard some say well into the second quarter. So the entire bullwhip of that taking place is going to affect other modes. James mentioned intermodal. Intermodal is feeling the strain right now with lack of availability of chassis and other equipment that it takes to support that. There's also a shortage of equipment in Asia to load. You would imagine that there were some extra loaders in the fourth quarter that were put on the water for no other reason other than to return equipment. So it's an issue. Been doing this a long time, never seen this, but we never saw 2020. None of us ever saw 2020 in our work lives. And you can't imagine something that monumental not leaving a mark on 2021, particularly the first half of the year. And I know each of my colleagues have mentioned that so far. Rates are kind of following this whipsaw bullwhip. Rates are at record levels. Normally rates drop, as I think James mentioned, after peak season. We hadn't seen that. We've seen rates go up. So they've gone up 8% over the last couple of weeks. US West Coast rates hit all the way up to $4,200 for a 40-foot standard out of Asia to US West Coast. That's 200% higher than it was last year. That's a lot for companies to absorb into their cost, and that's cost that they're absorbing every day right now at record pace with the record volumes that we have. Rates hit last week 5,400 for China to US East Coast. That's 110% higher than December last year. So the economic impact, not only in the slow transfer of inventory into the supply chain that has its own impact, you've got the direct impact of the direct cost that it's now costing people to book containers. There are many of our customers are calling us because they're being asked to pay peak season surcharge, and the first thing they would say is, I thought peak season was over. Well, the ocean carriers are using that ability to charge a premium to guarantee booking on a container. Can you imagine? I already am paying high. Now you're wanting to charge me $1,000 more to guarantee booking. But those that need the product, they're paying it, and the carriers will keep charging it. Right now, I want you to sense the impact of this. 37% of the containers in China are being rolled. So if you were booked on a particular vessel, 1/3 of those containers are being rolled to the next sailing. So that is going to put every one of those containers at least 1 week behind in getting to the US. And again, with the infrastructure issues in the Port of Long Beach, particularly in New York and New Jersey a little bit, you're seeing that inventory back up to where it's going to be a challenge for companies to absorb. I'm going to hold the China 301 comment to the end, but port and rail congestion is at record levels right now. E-commerce, the vaccine, the medical products to support the vaccine are really going to present challenges. I think through the second, up until the end of the second quarter in 2021. I think that we're going to see rates remain, at higher levels. Will they drop? Yeah, they'll probably drop on a week-to-week basis, but the demand, the e-commerce demand, the PPE demand, others are going to pull those levels back up. I think that we're going to look at record rate levels at least to mid-year, and I think service will suffer at least through the first quarter into the second quarter. Air, we didn't put a bullet, but I know a lot of our clients ship air freight. Air rates are high. They're 40% over what they were this time last year. PPE and vaccine are going to use a lot of air capacity as we get into the first and second quarter, and rates will go up because of that. I don't know that they'll get all the way up to the levels that they were right after, the COVID push, when they got up as high as $20 per kilo to the West Coast. But they're going to get up in double digits. I'm highly confident that as capacity comes out of that market as well, you're going to see rates go up. A lot of our clients have been impacted significantly by China 301 tariffs. There was a lot of rhetoric during the political season, as there always is, about maybe the Biden administration looking very hard at some rollbacks. The rhetoric has changed closer to inauguration, and some comments that I read this week inside the industry is that they're certainly going to slow play that. They're going to assess the full impact. I think the infrastructure issues that we have, the capacity constraint coming through the Port of Long Beach, certainly needs to take on more of our focus in China 301 right now. And I know that it's affected a lot of our clients' business, and we're respectful of that. But I really don't see that happening. It's certainly not on the short list of items that the administration wants to address. So Sophie, I'm sorry I didn't have better news, but it's a very tough, volatile time in the international world, and I know a lot of our clients are experiencing that pain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Rick, I was listening to you, and I kept waiting for them for you to add some hope and inspiration for all of us here. So if the audience is a little stunned by anything that they've heard so far, but certainly by what we just heard from Rick, please jot down your questions. We've got him live, and he can answer for everyone. But with that, John, let's put a bow on this.
All right, thanks, Sophie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll start with talking really about packaging and manufacturing. Unfortunately, I'm going to continue Rick's trend of not great news. Dow, Chevron, ExxonMobil announced additional increases on resin in January, and that represents 5 increases in the last 8 months. And when you start to compound that of where we were before last June, we're looking to 20 to 25% on that plastic that's informing all that poly bag that we're using on the e-commerce side. Similarly, no big surprise, linerboard manufacturers in November pushed up increased $50 per ton on corrugate. So now we're 8 to 12% there. And with where we're going, you can probably expect that we're going to continue to see increases as we move through with shortages in paper and the increased demand for e-commerce product. So really, it's a great time to make sure, as Todd talks about dimensions and all that on the parcel side, don't use boxes that are too big, because you're paying for it on both sides. Now for some of the good news. The ISM report closed in December over 60%, which was the highest in 2.5 years, with new orders and production increases, over 60% for the 6th straight month. So, what are we seeing there? Very optimistic about the demand that consumers are putting out there. Still a lot of concern with the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. What's the impact of COVID on their ability to staff and meet the capacity constraints or demands that the consumers are putting on everyone? So while seeing some of these price increases is a little disheartening, what's driving them is really positive. We're seeing strong manufacturing performance as we're moving into 2021. And so, kind of now, what does this mean from a strategic planning perspective? Everyone was talking about risk as we move through 2020. I always like to say high water hides a lot of rocks. Well, the water got real low, and so really exposed a lot of opportunities in the supply chain to do things differently. And you heard us talk all through last year, planning, data, analytics. So, now that unfortunately a lot of this has become a little bit of the norm, the consumer behavior, no one's talking about, everybody is going all back into stores. We're going to continue to see the e-commerce. And that's going to put pressure on collaboration with your supplier partners and how you may need them to behave to support customers. And there's going to still a lot of pent up demand, which just like we were talking about on the manufacturing, that's what's driving it. So now is the time to take a step back and say, what is my strategic supply chain plan? Because that takes time. A lot of talk last year about everybody's going to start onshoring, or nearshoring, diversifying their geographic footprint so that we reduce risk. And risk and supply chain are more of a boardroom conversation now than they've ever been before. And so, because these things take time, you've got to plan for them. You've got to go ahead and start thinking about your strategy and bringing that information to the companies and the boards so that we can start investing to make these changes. So along those lines, we've talked about capacity constraints on the modal side, on the international side. Something that I don't think people really have ever talked about before is analytical capacity constraint. All of this demand to understand what inventory is doing, what consumer behavior is doing, all the traditional methods of forecasting that companies relied on, kind of out the window, because you sure can't plan on 2020 as being a good indicator of 2021. But understanding what you need to do is really putting a lot of stress on individual companies, on the resources that they have, as well as your partners and the resources that they have to be able to deploy. I was talking with a consulting company yesterday, and the high demand for getting the data visibility to the level that they need it to make decisions and make sound decisions. So you're going to see that become a recurring theme, and you really need to reach out to TI and leverage us to help bolster your analytical resources to help inform a lot of this. And all of that goes into, the network design. But beyond that, and I was reading an article the other day talking about the investments that need to happen in the short term, especially on the retail side, with these shifting consumer behaviors, again, that are now becoming permanent, is really looking at all these indirect processes and freeing up cash on these administrative processes that support the business to be able to make the investments that they need to make on the infrastructure side and the system side. Digitization, companies are investing and they have to invest to be able to compete. So where are you going to find that? And bringing in experts to look at end-to-end process maps, going from how you order from your vendors to how you supply your customers and make those decisions, really going to be critical to be successful and competitive as you move forward through 2021 and into 2022. There were some articles last year, I think I've referenced before, that talked about the companies that were most successful as we got on the backside of these economic shocks were the ones that invested during it. Not the ones that necessarily played it safe, but the ones that played it smart to position themselves to take advantage of all the changes that end up solidifying. So I just repeat, come to us, let us help, because we're looking at a whole lot of clients. And we're learning from everybody, so don't hesitate to reach out. So, Sophie?
Thanks, John. Michael, I think that concludes our presentation today, but I want to check in with you. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Absolutely. A lot of great questions from our audience. Want to really just kind of specify and localize who we want to give the first question to. So I'm going to give this first one. What is the most common mistake you see companies making in the marketplace? Kind of narrow it down. So Rick Brummett, why don't you answer that? And James Matthews as well. So Rick, what is the most common mistake you see companies making in the marketplace?
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for the question, whoever asked it. In the international world, a lot of decisions are made by a lot of companies based on one thing, and that's price. How cheap can I get the container? My friend John Richardson calls never put yourself in a position to where you have one point of failure. And a lot of times that price-based decision leads to a single point of failure. And we're seeing it right now. I mean, I talked about it. It is the port in Southern California. A lot of the cheap rates come through that port, and 40 vessels are sitting out there right now, and you've got inventory that are on those vessels. So that's a common mistake. It's an easy one to make. It's an expensive mode of transportation. I get that we have to save money, but the thing that we preach is contingency planning. What if scenarios? What if there is a pandemic? Well, we never knew what a pandemic was, but now it's got to be part of our what if planning. There are many ports that do business with Asia, sourcing partners that deal with, coming through the canal or going through Prince Rupert and coming across Canadian rail. Going through all those contingencies, now's the time to do that, folks. Now's the time to do that. Do not create a single point of failure in the international space. I guess that's the way I'd answer that, Michael.
And on the truckload side, I would say one of the biggest mistakes is letting the emotion of the market kind of drive your go forward strategy. A lot of times, especially right now, you're looking at these carriers abandoned me, these carriers took care of me, so I want to keep all my business there. We've preached great relationships with carriers and not churning your network just for the sake of churn, but that doesn't mean you take your eye off of new potential partners. So a lot of times we will want to look strategically at a partner that may add some capacity and some service, and let's test them out while honoring that relationship that you've had with dedicated partners for years. So I would just not necessarily let the market drive how we procure or the areas or the markets into which we procure. We really need to look at that strategically and not emotionally.
Great insight there. And of course, we got a lot of questions coming in from our audience. Want to let everybody know, if we don't get to your question, hang tight. We'll reach out and contact you with one of our experts to get the answers that you're looking for. But I do want to use the rest of this time to answer a few more questions. This one goes to Chris Mendenhall in LTL land. So Chris, as the economy recovers from pandemic, do you think LTL capacity will open as manufacturers go back to more full truckloads? And if so, does that present greater opportunities for shippers? And this question comes from Mike.
So I would say probably not, because we've all shifted our buying patterns. And so e-commerce is definitely feeding into that LTL market, and the LTL market is strong. We've also seen some consolidation. We've had a few smaller ones go out of business, a few smaller ones also be gobbled up, so capacity be taken out. So I don't really, this is the normal period of the year where rates get softer, and we're definitely not seeing that in January right now. And the upcoming things that we are working on for February doesn't look like that as well. Nothing crazy, but not that normal softening that we see. And again, e-commerce is definitely feeding into LTL carriers delivering it to your house. So.
Thanks, Chris. And of course, we started our presentation talking about Parcel. Let's take it back there to our Parcel expert, Todd Benge. Todd, question for you. What percentage increase would you expect to budget for Parcel shipping, knowing the 2021 increases are now paired with continual indefinite charges? And this is a question from Ray.
You're on
And
mute,
maybe
Todd.
take your mute off there, Todd.
Sorry about that. So yeah, you have to look at it, and I would look at this in two different buckets. If you're mostly an e-commerce type shipper, then I think you have to look at a double-digit budget plan. And you have to look at a double-digit budget plan because of the surcharges and fees. It's an unknown distance in which that's going to run. And I don't see them pulling that back anytime soon. So I expect that to happen through all of the first quarter. So if you look at where we are going in the world of small package, they're going to be more and more finite around package size and density. And cube is going to be the driving factor of taking a look at these different components. And you have to also look back and think about this, is that both UPS and FedEx have invested heavily in technology. So UPS is catching up as far as automated facilities go. The one thing about an automated facility is that everything has to be standardized to run through these belts. You don't have as much influence of a manual impact by having just somebody walking over and readjusting the box. It doesn't work that way in an automated facility. So if you're a commercial shipper, I think you need to probably plan in the single digits, but probably in the 5 to 7% range for your commercial type shipper. E-commerce is a situation where it's here to stay. The new norm is somewhere along the lines of COVID deep of 2020 to where we start to come out of COVID in 2021. It won't be 2019. So what Chris said about more delivery on the LTL side is absolutely a fact. I've never seen so many large products being shipped to a house, furniture, and where you would actually go to the store and pick it up and take it home or have it delivered locally. Now you're seeing it run through a national carrier and or even the regional carriers. So I anticipate that the LTL conversion between small package, understanding where small package ends and LTL begins, is going to be a critical factor for you to help maintain and control your cost so that you make sure you make the right mode selection, especially in the world of residential. So that's going to be a much more the forefront for you to help manage your cost. But I'm looking at double digit 10% probably in the e-commerce world and more of a 6-7% for a commercial world.
Great insight there, Todd. Keeping it in the parcel realm, another question for you, Todd. Do regional carriers do the sorting to the 5-digit zip codes, or does the shipper need to provide the parcels already sorted out into those 5-digit sacks? That may not be feasible for small shippers, or really even larger ones without sorting abilities.
So the regional carriers really function, if you think about it this way, they're just more of a extension. So you take a look at UPS and FedEx, right? They're national, cover the nation, and for the most part cover every zip code in the United States. So if you think of it in a regional carrier framework, what they do is they take selective groups of zip codes, they service in the territory in which they have their coverage. So they're almost like a mini Western, like On Track in the West, Lone Star in Texas, Oklahoma, Laser Ship up toward the east and the south, U.S. Cargo in the Midwest, Speedy up in the up there in Minnesota and Illinois. If you take a look at those type of footprints, they specialize in areas. They don't necessarily cover every zip code within that service territory. They're going to really focus on where the population is. A little bit like the DAS charge that UPS and FedEx have, because of those extended areas. Some of the regional carriers may not cover certain extended areas in their territory. So to go back to the original question about sortation, if you become a customer of a regional carrier, they give you and basically say, these are the zips that you're going to tender to us. And so this lends itself back to one of the areas of being prepared moving forward in the world of small packages, the investment in technology up front. Many, for the longest time, it's pretty much that you're a UPS house or a FedEx house. and your shipping system was either one of the other type supportive. And very few of these systems were multi-carrier. So now in this world, investing in that technology to help the selection process, but also being able to be smart enough to do mode selection between the two, between small package and LTL, is a advancement where I see you getting to the first leg up. It goes back to what Rick was talking about and what John was talking about, not being, single point of failure is a perfect example of the technology can lead you to help you expand that so you don't have a single point of failure moving forward, and you can implement a regional carrier or even a postal consolidator for your lightweight e-commerce shipments. Doing that in the future, I think, is going to be more and more critical, just for the sole reason the carriers are going to make it the decision for you by implementing more surcharges and fees on the more difficult packages to deliver in their network. So utilizing postal consolidator that does well for a certain segment of business that the nationals, UPS, FedEx, don't really want to handle. And then you take a look at the regional carriers by saying, okay, I can actually touch this particular regional carrier's territory, so therefore I have the technology that can make that selection process and manifesting process and make it happen. So then I have eliminated my single point of failure.
Great food for thought there, Todd, in the parcel space. And of course, our experts are available for your consultation. Just reach out and we'll share some of that contact information momentarily. But we do have a few minutes for still some remaining questions. And I'm going to throw this back into the freight realm with Truckload and LTL. And James, first you and then Chris, any advisement on timing of RFPs in the truckload realm right now?
So there are still areas in every organization to gain lane efficiencies and rate savings. So it would depend on if you're talking full network or maybe regional or even modal RFQs. I wouldn't necessarily say that today is a great market to do a full network RFQ because we're at the highest point that it's been in truckload rates for this time of year over several years. So with all those pressures that were mentioned, they're going to have to bid at high rates. I would anticipate the first half of this year being more guerrilla procurement, lane by lane, market by market, incumbent carrier by incumbent carrier, just having actual negotiations versus a true RFQ. Once we get on the back end, you might want to look at more of a full network. But let me also add in the caveat, if something changes within your business, an acquisition that now makes you a bi-coastal operation and you want to present yourself in a larger, as a larger entity, it might make sense to be able to identify some closed loop shipping. So it would be a little bit specific to the client, but if I were to say when is a good time to RFQ, full network RFQ, probably second half of the year, but definitely areas to do strategic up until that point.
Any additional thoughts from LTL, Chris?
Sure. So in LTL side, we're never not touching the market for our existing clients. So even in a tight market, there's always that opportunity out there for all the way down to the 5-digit zip. It's not unusual for us to have, we're having conversations with the corporate pricing people, with the carriers every day, and it's not unusual for them to say, hey, we're dying out here, with the imbalance in whatever terminal that they may have that's got an issue. And so if it's too full on one side, they need freight on the other side. So, we're always reaching out to the market, sending them opportunities to look at or filling that backhaul need. So it's not so much of when's a good time to do it. We're never not doing it. We're always reaching out. And so for existing TI clients, they're hearing from their account managers on a consistent basis for opportunities that where we reach out to the market, find opportunity for them, where a carrier does have need, even in a tight market.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Good input there. And we're just about arriving at the end of our time here. I know there's some additional questions, and we'll have our SMEs reach out, try to get some responses to those questions. Also want to let everybody know after the conclusion of our webinar, we will have a recording live on our website so you can share it or review some of the information that we've shared today. Again, we will go ahead and wrap up our Digital Master Series event. Thank you to our moderator, Sophie Dabbs, and thank you to our panel of motor freight transportation experts.
Thanks so much, team.
Thank you.
Hope everyone has a great rest of your day and a great start to 2021.
Thank you, Sophie. To our audience, for more information or to reach out to our supply chain masters, just use that contact information on the screen. You can also visit us online at transportationinsight.com. That's where you can access more about our solutions, our blogs, and resource guides. You can also download our first quarter chain link. It details some of the topics today and offers you additional resources to support your transportation management and supply chain strategy in 2021. With that, on behalf of our panelists and Transportation Insight, thank you for joining our broadcast. May you master the remainder of your day.